It's a little bit after 9. I think we might have some participation via online presence today because of the weather, but I think we will go ahead and get started. The first item that I have on our agenda this morning is approval of the February 10th meetings, or minutes rather. Is there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve them? Moved by Representative Sanders, seconded by the Vice Chairman. Committee, all in favor of approval of the minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Note that they were approved unanimously, Gary. Our first item of business this morning, committee, is HB 2213, requiring that purchases of property and construction of buildings by townships are subject to protest petition and election procedure. So the first thing I believe we'll do is ask for Revisor Heim if he's available this morning. Mike, are you with us?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I am.
Thank you, sir. Would you give us a brief overview?
Sure. House Bill 2213.
Mike, do you have a hamster on a training wheel or something there in your office?
Let me.
Or is that something we're doing?
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I couldn't hear originally, and so I had two screens up doing the same thing. The bill deals with townships and their purchase of land and buildings, and the current law basically provides that they have to have an election in order to purchase land and buildings. And what this bill does is provide instead for a protest petition and election procedure. I could go into more details, but that's the gist of the bill.
Okay, thank you. So instead of just going ahead and current law says they have to take it to a vote. This bill would allow them not to take it to a public vote unless there's a protest petition, right? Signed by how many people?
10% 10% to the township. So that's the gist. There are some exceptions. They have the ability under current law to acquire up to not to exceed 10 acres of land, and so on. That's not subject to the election procedure, and it would not be subject to the protest petition procedure as well.
Okay, committee, any other questions of the revisor? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this only applies to townships. This doesn't apply to anything within a city limit?
It only applies to townships. That's correct.
Thank you.
Committee, any other questions?
Mr. Chair, tell me again, what is current and what would this do to change that? Give me your Cliff Notes version. You just said
current. You asking the revisor or myself?
Sorry, you.
Current law, township boards have to take it to a public vote if they're to acquire property that fits in some of these parameters that this bill outlines. If this bill was passed, township boards could go ahead and act, but their act would be subject to a protest petition. Are you familiar with the protest petition? If any taxing entity passes a tax increase, there might be 2 or 3 other things that fall under that. Anyhow, if it incurs a tax increase, then if a certain percentage of the people in that township, in this case, 10%, disagree with that, they can do what's called a protest petition. So they circulate a petition. It's required that 10% of the people in that township sign that. If that is valid, and if the county clerk validates the signatures, then it would have to go to a public vote. That makes sense? So instead of absolutely being a public vote, it's not necessarily going to be a public vote unless there's a protest petition circulated that's successful. Did I confuse you even more? Not regardless. Now, if this bill passes, they would not have to take it to a public vote unless, yes. Yeah, current law says they have to take it to a public vote to acquire the property. Is that clear? Thank you. Committee, any further questions of the revisor? Okay, if not, we will go ahead and begin the hearing then. I only have one proponent, and we have Representative Mike Amix from House District number 45. Mr. Amix, welcome to committee again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try not to be regular doing this. Well, I know, but after today, I'm trying not to think too many things up. You know, I had a couple of questions from townships, and this is kind of where this came from, that I couldn't answer, other than the fact that I find out that we have a law, 8104, that was actually brought into play, I think it was in 2004, that required the public vote to happen on any time that there was a property that come available under 10 acres. And I started thinking about this, and, you know, local control has got to be something that really happens here. And decision makers, you know, are elected to be able to carry out function. This seems to me that if you were to have an election requirement on a piece of property, and I stopped and thought about this, if somebody came to the township and said that they had a piece of property available in December of 2020, they would have to wait until the next regular scheduled election, which would be in 2022, the primary, to be able to put the purchase together, or they could pay for a special election. Consequently, it's just driving the, you know, the price up. So, you know, I stopped and looked at this and decided, okay, Mr. Heim does a great job as our revisor on our local government things, and was extremely helpful in the explanation. Right now, you have to have an election. If you go out and township goes out and buys an acre of property, and you know the price is X, they have to have an election. The truth of the matter is that this gives the opportunity not to exclude the electors, voters in any way, because it gives an opportunity for a 10% protest petition, which is, I think most of us could probably go on a corner and get 10% of voters to be able to sign a petition on something that would really require taking to a vote. So that does that. There's another part of this also, and it is in subsection E, which is new. It talks about land that is already owned, that was acquired by the township, and wants to construct a building. They shall be subject to the same protest petition as was talked about earlier in the purchase of ground. Okay, so I want you all to understand that ground that the township already owns would come under this also. I've had questions about that, and, you know, I'll leave that up to the committee to decide if amendment is something to be looked at there. I've had one suggestion is possible grandfathering, you know, current lands that are owned by townships, because they've already gone through whatever they're going to go through. So, but anyway, I wanted to be upfront about that, because there is the second part of that, and something that, you know, has brought a little bit of maybe angst. So anyway, questions?
All right, committee, any questions? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. This is an interesting proposal. So I'm wondering on the last one that you just brought attention to about the township that the land that they already own having to be subject. Why was that? What brought you to include that in there?
Essentially, if there's been a purchase made sometime, you know, in recent times, it would clear up anything that was, you know, brought forward.
And is there like an example? Is there like something that brought this to your attention as far as like a township that's needing a more expedient way to deal with property that they perhaps are acquiring or have?
You know, I've had like 2 or 3 townships that have asked me about, you know, how they they deal with this. So, you know, I had one township that had talked to me about, you know, this particular law, and if there was a way to make it so that they could move quicker and take care of a piece of property. But, you know, it's been a while.
Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, is there an acreage or a dollar amount threshold that would have to be met in order for them to go ahead and do this? I mean, right now, it doesn't matter any piece of property, whether it's 1 acre or 1,000 acres, they have to have a vote on it. Is that correct?
No, there is an exemption of 10 acres or more that the election is not required. That's under existing law.
I was trying to find that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Representative, I think we're going to let you off the hook. We appreciate your testimony.
Chairman and colleagues, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your questions.
Thank you, sir. All right, committee, I will note that there are no other proponents. There are no neutral, nor are there any opponent testimony, or is there any opponent testimony? So that will conclude the hearing on HB 2213. Next, we will turn to HB 2238, which is eliminating the dollar limitation for acceptance of gifts by donors to school districts or cities or both for library purposes. I think the first item of business will turn to Revisor Mike Heim. Mike, are you still with us?
Mr. Chairman, yes. And
thank you.
You, Mr. Chairman, just summarized the bill. Currently, there's a $500,000 limitation on the gifts, and this would delete that. The statute authorizes either the Board of Education of a school district, the city, or city and the school district acting together to receive a gift, and the gift may be conditioned that the money be used only for library purposes, so it could be used for some other purpose. But I think the intent here for the change is for libraries. Current law provides that the donor can basically donate a principal sum of money and receive interest, I think, throughout their lifetime. But that's current law, and the real meat of the bill is it deletes the $500,000 cap.
Just for clarity, Mike, that $500,000 cap was put into law in '68. Is that correct? Memory serves me.
I'm not sure when.
Well, obviously, it was sometime in the past when $500,000 is more dollars than it is in today's dollars, correct? So that's the purpose of the bill, is to be able to allow cities or school districts to take advantage of a gift should they be bequeathed one. Correct. All right, committee, any questions of the revisor? Vice Chair Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's no fiscal note on that, I'm assuming, correct?
No, I don't believe there would be. I mean, this is the only impact would be a positive impact for the city or school district.
Okay. Chair.
Any other questions of the revisor? Okay, Mr. Heim, thank you so much for your time. Committee, the first proponent that we have for this bill, number one, would be Representative Ken Collins, House District number 2. Mr. Collins, I believe, brought this bill. Representative Collins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Thompson, Vice Chair Blex, Minority Leader Curtis, and other committee members. I'm testifying today as a proponent of House Bill 2238, which, if passed, will amend KSA 12-1252 to eliminate the $500,000 limit on gifts that cities and school districts may receive for the purpose of libraries. The small communities in my district that have libraries are enriched with availability of books, software, videos, and other resources, as well as having libraries serve as community meeting areas. I'm sure that at the time the monetary limit was imposed at $500,000, it went much further than it does now due to inflation. And if a donor is generous enough to give to help their community to prosper, then we should be willing and able to allow this to happen. I know that this is a very brief testimony, and as my fellow committee members have probably noticed by now, I'm a man of few words, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Collins, thank you. Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Collins, for bringing this bill. My question is, so you don't think there should be a limit on how much somebody should be able to donate for a library?
No, I mean, it's something to help the community, so who are we to say, no, you can't give this much? But as mentioned by the chairman, $500,000, and I believe this was in '68 when the limit was put on. $500,000 went a lot farther than it does now, and I think Amanda's going to speak to that in her testimony.
And I agree with you. It seems kind of ironic that in the first place we did limit the amount that somebody could gift to a library. So
you know what they say, $1 million here, $1 million there. Sooner or later, it adds up to real money. So.
Committee, any other questions? All right, if not, Representative Collins, thank you for your testimony and thanks for bringing the bill. Committee, the next proponent testimony we have is from Amanda Stanley, who probably at this point doesn't need an introduction, but she's General Counsel with the Kansas League of Municipalities. Amanda, welcome back to House Local Government Committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I won't belabor the bill. It is a pretty simple bill. I will just say that this was brought to our attention in 2020 by one of our member cities. The city manager is going to testify today why this matters to his community. But we started researching. The limit in law was put in place in 1968. I was curious. So that is the equivalent of $3.84 million in 2021. It has never been indexed. It's never been updated. And as hard as my law student looked, we could not find a public purpose for why it went in place at the time. So I guess we can all just update it, hopefully, and agree that if somebody wants to be generous to their community and build a library or fund a library, that there doesn't seem to be a public purpose reason why we would tell them that they have to find other things to do with their money. I know it's not very common that people want to give money to government, but some people just really love their community and want to build community centers, and I think that that's a worthwhile public endeavor that we should support. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Committee, any questions? The way, Amanda, I do have a quick, just I guess a clarification, but there's no other uses that this bill allows. It's simply for libraries, correct?
It's simply for libraries. It's in the Library Act. So all you can do is donate money for the purpose of building, maintaining, or funding a library.
And or stocking it as
Correct.
far as, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Committee, anything further? If not, thank you for your testimony. Committee, we have scheduled to join us via WebEx Mr. John Zafuta, the City Administrator of the City of Frontenac. Mr. Zafuta, are you out there today? Or are
I
you
am,
Mr.
Chair.
Good, thank you. Welcome to the Local Government Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, for the opportunity to speak on House Bill 2238. I submitted some testimony to you, written testimony earlier this week, which really stressed the importance of libraries, entertainment, enhancing knowledge, really supplementing education in a number of ways. But specifically, I want the committee to consider that under the current law, cities may be unable to take advantage of a large private gift or funding. The donations to libraries are restricted, and allowing donations for libraries would allow cities like ours to provide a great service and reduce the tax burden on doing such a program. You know, libraries today are so much more than shelves of books and quiet desks. There are opportunities for children, digital content, history, genealogy, and much more, all there for enrichment. Frontenac's never had a library. Really, the closest that we ever come is the little free library down the street from City Hall, because libraries are expensive. They do cost money. A lot of times it's tax money, and basic outfitting today is very expensive, and it's much more than the $500,000 limit that the current law allows. So the benefits of libraries are not hard to find, but Frontenac does have a single interest in House Bill 2238 and removal of the $500,000 cap on the donations. Our city is a perfect example of how a city can lose out. In 2019, we were surprised and frankly shocked to be notified that a former school teacher and husband left a very sizable donation to the city of Frontenac solely for the purpose of building a library. We're excited, what an amazing opportunity, but as we find out, KSA 12-1252 passed in sometime in 1960s. That donation far exceeds that limit. But by amending the statute, it opens up the opportunity for cities like ours. As I read through the statutes, I can only say that our specific situation has nothing to do with individual tax benefits. I think subsection B goes into interest, annuity payments. Nobody's incurring any extra debt on this. We simply have an opportunity for a large donation over the limit. Cities don't get opportunities like this very often. It seems that city services are always increasing. We're asked to tax less and do more. So private funding definitely has its place in this situation. So I do hope for the committee support of House Bill 2238. If you have any questions about our situation, I'm happy to answer them.
Mr. Zafuta, thank you for your testimony. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what has become of the money? Were you able to put it in escrow? Will you still be able to go forward with the project if we pass this?
I believe we'll still be able to go through with the project. It's actually still in probate right now. It's a drawn out process because the benefactors are deceased at this time. So, nobody's going to make money on this except potentially the city for a library.
Committee, any other questions? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know who this question would be best for, but while we're updating 1968 statute, I'm curious if the definition of library is still pertinent to all the materials you would find in a modern day library.
That's a fair question. I don't know if the reviser is still there. He maybe would be the one that could answer that. Mike, are you still?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Yes, sir.
I don't see the need to define libraries. I think it's they are evolving, I guess, in terms of what they provide. I think if you tried to define it, you'd end up needing to redefine it a few years down the road.
That makes sense. And yeah, I didn't know if there was an existing definition that we'd need to update along with this. So thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sure library is different in 1968 than it is in 2021, no question. Committee, any other questions of Mr. Zafuta? Okay, Mr. Zafuta, thank you so much for your testimony. And congratulations. You have a good problem on your hands. Good for
yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, committee, I will note that we have written only testimony from Leah Flitter, Director of Governmental Relations with Kansas Association of School Boards. Obviously, we have no other written testimony by proponents. We have no neutral nor no opponent testimony. Any other clarification on that before we move on? Representative Collins, you feel comfortable with your bill? You feel comfortable with your, okay, thank you, sir. All right, committee, we will conclude the hearing on HB 2238. And moving on, I think what we will do next with committee's approval is we will take possible action on some bills previously heard. And what we heard last week was HB 2175, which was the bill creating the Dwayne Peasley Technical Training Center District. Representative Amix is keeping us busy here. Is there any discussion on that bill? If there's no discussion, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we pass out HB 2175 out of this committee favorable for passage.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Representative Collins. Any discussion before we take a vote, committee? If not, I have a motion and a second. All in favor of passing HB 2175 favorably, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Gary, I'd like to note that it passed unanimously, please. Representative Amix.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for the support. I think it's a very good bill, and I think it's one that we can all be proud of.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative. You seem to be bringing us some good legislation this year. We appreciate it. And, you know, we didn't really discuss much while we were working this bill, but I think we had a pretty robust discussion when we actually heard this bill. So it definitely, in our discussion, showed the benefit to the community and even, you know, greater benefit to our state. So I'm glad that we were able to come to agreement on this. Thank you.
Committee, any further comment? Gary, are you with us? Good. All right, committee, that wraps up today's work. And if there's nothing else for the good of the committee, next week, yes, let's do that. We're still a little bit undecided on a couple of things for next week. We will meet on Wednesday. Obviously, we have a couple bills today that would be eligible to be worked next week. Unless the committee tells me not to, I would like to proceed on both of them. And there's a possibility we might have a hearing next week on either one or two bills. Is there anything that the committee feels strongly about? Okay. Yeah, watch the calendar. Gary will do. Representative Sanders.
Mr. Chairman, is it your sense that we will not be meeting on Monday?
That is my sense at this moment in time. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the committee? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.